She's with me. 3 words. No apology, no explanation, no flinch. The crystal glass was already in pieces on the marble floor, and 50 of the most powerful people in the city had already turned to look. Standing in the wreckage was a small girl in a lavender dress, frozen, her face white as bone. He stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, calm, unhurried, one hand on her shoulder. Nobody moved. Not because of what he said, because of the way he said it, the voice of a man who had never once in his life needed to say anything twice. If this story already has you hit subscribe, drop your city in the comments right now. Let me see exactly how far this travels. Stay until the end. You won't see the twist coming. The envelope had arrived on a Tuesday, and it had been a mistake. Daniel Carter knew it the moment he picked it up. Cream paper gold lettering, the kind of stationery that existed in a world his hands were never supposed to touch. The Laurent Family Foundation Annual Benefit Gala. 1 guest admission. He'd turned it over twice, checked the address twice, and then set it on the kitchen counter with the careful deliberateness of a man placing something dangerous down gently. His phone had rung 4 times while he stood there looking at it. He didn't answer. Emily had found the envelope in approximately 3 minutes. She'd been doing homework at the kitchen table, 2nd grade math, which she finished with the impatient efficiency of a child who considered arithmetic beneath her actual capabilities, and she'd spotted it the way she spotted everything immediately, completely, with the focused attention of someone who had decided the world was worth paying close attention to. She'd held it up with both hands. "Daddy, what's this?" "Nothing, leave it." She read it, slowly, carefully. Then she'd looked up at him with her mother's eyes, the ones that had never in 7 years of existence accepted nothing as a complete answer, and said, "We should go." He'd looked at his daughter, at the envelope, at the life he was trying to build around her, like walls, like insulation, like the thing between her and everything he actually was. "Emily." "She helped us," Emily said. "The lady from the foundation. We should say thank you. We sent a letter." "Letters aren't the same." "Emily." "I'm going to make her a drawing," Emily said, and turned back to her homework, and that had been the complete and total end of the conversation in her mind, which meant it was the end of it in his too, because it had been that way since she was 3 years old, and he had never once found a way around it. He'd stood in the kitchen for another minute. His phone rang again. He silenced it. Then he'd gone to tell Marcus he needed to borrow a shirt. The shirt was the easy part. The parking structure was the easy part. Even the valet line, the parade of black cars and long cars and men who stood beside them like they'd been placed there by a decorator, even that was manageable. Daniel Carter had walked into rooms far more dangerous than this one. He had sat at tables where the conversation was polite and the outcomes were final. He had been the most dangerous person in rooms full of dangerous people and learned to wear his face like a coat, smooth, unreadable, giving nothing. He had not expected the hardest part of tonight to be watching his daughter smooth the front of her Goodwill dress in the rearview mirror with the focused, happy energy of a child who believed completely in where she was going. "Ready?" he asked. She looked at him in the mirror and smiled. "I've been ready since Tuesday." He laughed. He couldn't help it. It came out of him clean and involuntary, the way laughter only came when Emily produced it without his permission from somewhere that it had nothing to do with the rest of his life. "Let's go, Bug," he said. The valet took his keys with the carefully neutral expression of a professional who had made a career of not reacting to the vehicle. Daniel handed them over without comment. He'd stopped explaining himself to people a long time ago. You either needed to or you didn't, and he had not needed to in years. His phone vibrated in his pocket as they walked toward the entrance. He felt it the way he felt everything from that world of a low-frequency awareness, like weather. He didn't reach for it. Emily's hand found his at the door. He adjusted his grip automatically, thumb over her knuckles. The gesture so deep in his body now that he did it without thinking, the way he'd been doing it since she was 3, and the world was enormous, and his hand was the thing that made it smaller. The lobby hit them with the particular silence of real money, the hush of a space where nothing was accidental and everything was calibrated, where the chandeliers overhead burned with the steady, absolute certainty of things that had never considered the possibility of going dark. Emily looked up. Her mouth dropped open just slightly. "Pretty," she whispered. "Yeah," he said. A woman at the entrance checked their invitation with the professional smile of someone who had assessed 10,000 guests in exactly this way. She looked at the envelope, looked at Daniel. Something flickered behind her eyes, a micro-hesitation, a recalibration, the instinct of someone who had just encountered a variable that didn't fit her pattern, and then the smile returned smooth as ever. "Mr. Carter, welcome." They walked through. The ballroom was another country. Daniel had been in expensive rooms. He had been in rooms where the flowers alone cost more than most people's monthly rent, where the conversations were pleasant and the stakes were absolute. He was not impressed by expensive rooms, but he watched Emily absorb this one, the chandeliers, the centerpieces, the women in gowns that had names, and he felt the particular ache of a man who has built two lives in the same body and cannot always tell which one is real. The room registered them. He felt it the way a space adjusts when something enters that doesn't fit the expectation. Not hostility, just recalibration. Eyes that moved and then moved away with the practiced invisibility of the very wealthy observing something they'd decided not to acknowledge. He let them look. He had been looked at by worse. "Daddy," Emily tugged his hand, "there are so many forks. You don't need them." "Which one would I need if I did work from the outside in?" "Who decided that?" "Rich people." "Seems like a thing they'd decide." She looked around the room with the calm, methodical attention of someone taking inventory. Then very quietly, "Is that her?" He followed her gaze. Victoria Laurent stood near the far end of the room in midnight blue, managing a circle of donors with the practiced ease of someone who had been the most important person in every room she entered for so long that it had become effortless. She was formidable. He could see it from here, not just the money, not the clothes, but the particular quality of a person who had built their authority from the inside out rather than inheriting it. He had encountered three types of powerful people in his life. The kind who inherited it and wore it lightly because they'd never had to earn it. The kind who clawed for it and wore it like armor because they remembered what the ground felt like. And the kind who had built something real and moved through the world with the quiet certainty of people who knew exactly what they were standing on. Victoria Laurent was the third kind. He respected that, more than she would ever know or need to know. "She doesn't look like someone who helps people," Emily said. "What does someone who helps people look like?" "Softer." She tilted her head. "But maybe you don't have to be soft to help. Maybe you just have to decide to." He looked at his daughter, 7 years old. "Yeah, Bug, maybe you're right." His phone vibrated again. 3 times in quick succession, the pattern he recognized as urgent. He reached into his pocket, angled the screen away from Emily, looked at it. 3 messages from a number he knew by heart. 3 words each. "We need to talk, tonight. It's Marco." He put the phone back in his pocket. "We should wait until she's less busy," Emily said, still watching Victoria across the room. "Good plan." They waited. And Daniel Carter stood in the middle of the most expensive party he'd attended in years, in a borrowed shirt with his daughter's hand in his, and felt the two halves of his life pressing against each other, like tectonic plates quiet on the surface, everything moving underneath. He was thinking about Marco, about the message, about what it meant and when it would have to be answered and what it would require of him when it was. He was thinking about how Emily's dress looked under the chandeliers, the lavender catching the light, making her look for a moment like the kind of child who belonged in rooms like this, which she did, which she absolutely did, and making sure she always would, was the reason he had never stopped doing the things he did. He was not thinking about the glass. It happened the way these things always happened, the ordinary physics of a room in motion, a small child reaching slightly too far an object at the very edge of its stability. The glass went over. The sound it made on the marble was impossibly loud. Every head turned, and Emily stood in the silence with one hand still raised, her face white, the posture of a child who understood she had just made a mistake, in a place where mistakes were expensive. He was moving before the sound finished. 3 steps. He crouched. He took her by the arms and looked at her, directly blocking out the room the way he had trained himself to block out everything that wasn't the one thing that mattered. "Look at me," he said, quiet, even. She looked. Her eyes were filling up. "Accident. You're fine. I'm right here." "Everyone's looking," she whispered. "Let them." "Daddy, Emily." He held her gaze with the full, steady weight of his attention. "You are not in trouble. Nobody is going to say anything to you, I promise." She believed him. She always believed him. That was the thing about promises. The only way they carried weight was if you had never once broken them, and with Emily, he never had. He stood up. The hotel manager was already moving toward them with the apologetic purpose of a man whose entire professional value proposition was making exactly this kind of moment disappear. Two staff members were materializing with equipment to clean the glass. The room was redistributing its attention with the practiced social discretion of people who had been trained to manage their reactions. Daniel looked at none of them. He looked straight ahead at the one person in the room who had not looked away, who had not performed the polite recalibration of someone deciding not to notice, who was watching him with the specific, undiluted attention of someone who had identified something they hadn't expected. Victoria Laurent. The manager arrived. "Sir, I'm so sorry if you and your daughter could just—" "She's fine," Daniel said. "Of course, but the broken glass, the liability—" "She's fine." Same tone, same register. The voice of a man who had made himself clear once and saw no need to do it again. From across the room, clean and precise, "Is there a problem?" Victoria's voice. Not loud. It didn't need to be. The manager pivoted toward her immediately, the social gravity of her presence operating as it always did, absolute automatic without effort. Daniel spoke first, not aggressively, not loudly. He turned toward Victoria Laurent across 40 feet of marble floor and said 3 words with the particular complete, unhurried certainty of a man who had long ago stopped asking the world's permission for anything. "She's with me." The room held its breath. Victoria looked at him. The silence stretched. 3 seconds. 4. Long enough that it became a thing in itself, not empty, but loaded, the kind of silence that carries more information than speech. She walked toward him. Not the way a host approaches a problem, the way a person walks towards something they've decided they want to understand. She crossed the distance between them with the measured, unrushed stride of someone for whom movement was always purposeful, and she stopped 6 feet away and looked at Daniel Carter with the full weight of her assessment. He looked back, easy, relaxed in the way that only came from training or from never once in your adult life having met a room you couldn't control. "Your daughter," she said. "Yes." "She broke a rather significant piece of crystal." "She did." "Accident." He paused. "I'll replace it." "The offer is unnecessary." She looked at Emily. Her voice changed, not softer exactly, but recalibrated. Less authority, more attention. "Are you all right?" Emily had composed herself with the speed of a child who had decided this was not the moment to fall apart. Her chin was up, her eyes were clear. She met Victoria Laurent's gaze with the directness of someone who had been taught that looking away was never the answer. "Yes, ma'am," Emily said. "I'm sorry about the glass. I didn't mean to." "I know you didn't." Victoria looked at the child for a moment in the particular way of someone seeing something they hadn't expected and are deciding how to classify it. Then she looked back at Daniel. "You're not on my guest list, Mr. Carter," he said. "Daniel Carter." Something crossed her face. A small thing, gone in less than a second, but it had been there. "Mr. Carter," she said carefully, "why are you here?" And Emily reached into her small lavender purse, took out a folded square of yellow construction paper, and held it out to the most powerful woman in the room with both hands in complete solemnity. "We came to say thank you," she said, "for what you did for us." Victoria looked at the piece of paper. She took it. She opened it. And Daniel Carter stood with his borrowed shirt in his daughter's hand and the phone vibrating against his ribs with Marco's name on the screen, and watched a billionaire philanthropist look at a crayon house with a sun in the corner and go very, very still. "I don't remember this," Victoria said quietly. Not to either of them. To herself, the honest accounting of a woman confronting a gap in her knowledge of her own life's work. "I don't remember you." "I know," Daniel said. She looked up. "That should bother you." "It did," he said, "for about a week. Then I decided it mattered more that we were still in the house." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the drawing. Then she looked at Emily. Something moved through her expression. Not one thing, several things arriving in sequence, a series of small adjustments in the architecture of her face. "Sit down," she said. "Both of you." Emily sat immediately with the confidence of someone who had never doubted this moment was coming. Daniel sat. He looked across the table at this woman who had no idea who he was and thought about Marco's message and thought about the two lives pressing against each other and thought about his daughter's lavender dress in the chandelier light. He thought, give me tonight. Just let this be tonight. And across the room, in the shadow near the bar, a silver-haired man named Gerald Whitmore had already opened his phone and was quietly running a search on the name Daniel Carter. Richard set the 2 extra place settings with the careful efficiency of a man who had stopped asking questions several years ago and was therefore very good at his job. He placed the last fork, aligning the napkin, and withdrew without commentary the professional ghost Victoria had always needed and never sufficiently appreciated. Emily watched him go. He's doing math in his head, she said. Victoria looked at her. About whether this is good or bad, he hasn't decided. He rarely decides quickly, Victoria said. It's one of his more useful qualities. Emily accepted this. She was doing her own assessment of the room, the slow, unhurried inventory she ran on every new space she entered, and Daniel watched it happen with the divided attention of a father and a man who had other things on his mind. The phone was in his pocket. Marco was in his head. The message had been clear, and the timing was deliberate, and the fact that it had come tonight of all nights was not coincidence, because nothing in that world happened by coincidence. But Emily was unfolding her napkin with great seriousness, and Victoria was looking at the drawing again. And he was here, and Marco would have to wait. Tell me about the application, Victoria said. She set the drawing flat on the table between them and looked at Daniel with the direct, unmanaged attention of someone who has decided to stop maintaining distance and start having an actual conversation. Not the category it fell under. What the situation actually was. He'd prepared a version of this answer, a clean, simple version, the version of a struggling father, honest and dignified, the kind of story that worked in rooms like this. He'd prepared it for 3 weeks. He gave her most of it. The debt from Emily's mother cancer treatment, the particular financial devastation of trying to save someone's life with money that didn't exist, the near eviction, the 11 applications over 4 months. He kept the edges clean. He left out the parts that didn't belong at this table in front of his daughter in this borrowed shirt under these lights. Victoria listened the way she did everything completely, with no performance of attentiveness, just actual attention, the full weight of a very sharp mind applied without filtration. 11 foundations, she said. 11. And mine was the only response. In 6 weeks, which was, he paused, which was faster than I thought anything would move. We have a rapid response protocol. Her voice was level, but something underneath it was not. I implemented it 3 years ago. I have never once followed a case through it to see what happened on the other end. Why would you, he said, not excusing it, just factual. You have 1,000 decisions a day. You set up the structure. You trust it to work. But it's people, she said, and the sharpness in her voice was not directed at him. It was the sound of a woman arguing with herself and losing cleanly and without mercy. Every line on every spreadsheet is a person who was in a position where the floor had given out, and She stopped, pressed her lips together. I have never once thought about the floor. Emily looked up from her bread roll. What do you mean? Daniel said, we were talking about. I know what she meant, Emily said. She looked at Victoria. The floor is the moment when things got small, when everything that usually holds you up stopped holding. She turned her fork over in her hand, studying it. My dad calls it the bottom, but I think floor is better, because the bottom means you stopped. A floor is something you stand on. The table was very quiet. Victoria looked at this child, a long look, full and unguarded, the look of a woman encountering an intelligence that had arrived from a completely unexpected direction. How did you see, I made it up just now, Emily said, but it's right. It is, Victoria said. Do you know what yours was, Emily asked. Your floor, Daniel said. Emily. It's okay, Victoria said. And she told them, her father's company. The unraveling, the 4 months of 2 a.m. mathematics, the decision she'd made in an office that smelled like old paper, and her father's failure and her own terrified, furious determination that she was never going to be in a position where the numbers didn't balance, that she was going to understand the structure of things so completely that nothing could come apart without her seeing it coming. So you built systems, Daniel said. I built everything, she said quietly, and I stayed inside it. And somewhere in the staying inside it, I forgot that the systems were made of people. Emily drifted across the table and put her hand over Victoria's. Just for a second, just the small, complete gesture of a child who had been raised in a house where people touched each other when things got heavy. She withdrew it without ceremony and went back to her bread roll as if it had been the most ordinary thing in the world. Victoria looked at where Emily's hand had been. She did not say anything for a moment. Daniel's phone vibrated again. He didn't move, didn't reach for it, but something in his jaw tightened by approximately 1 degree, and Victoria, who had spent 30 years reading people across tables, noticed. "You don't have to be here," she said. "If there's somewhere else, there isn't," he said, and he meant it with the particular fierce sincerity of a man who has made a decision tonight that the rest of his life is going to have to accommodate. She looked at him. Something in his answer had landed differently than she expected. Not dismissive, not social politeness, but the sound of something that had been decided at a much deeper level than this evening. She filed it. She would return to it. A waiter arrived. Emily ordered pasta, looking at Daniel first for the nod, receiving it, then turning to Victoria and asking what was good here, with the gravity of an ambassador consulting a local expert. The salmon was recommended. Emily considered it and declined. The pasta remained correct. After the waiter left, Emily said, "Can I ask you something personal?" Victoria said yes. "Are you happy?" The question dropped into the table's air and settled there with the weight of something much larger than its size. Daniel watched Victoria receive it, watched her not deflect it, not soften it, not convert it into something more manageable. She sat with it the way a person sits with a question they have been avoiding and have finally been cornered by. "That's complicated," Victoria said. "My dad says when something is complicated, it usually means the true answer is simple, and you're not ready to say it yet," Emily said. Victoria looked at Daniel. "Do you say that frequently?" he said. "It's very accurate," Emily confirmed, "and very annoying." Victoria made a sound short, genuine surprise that was almost a laugh and arrived before she could stop it. It opened in her face and closed quickly, and in the second after, she looked like a person who had caught themselves doing something they'd forgotten they knew how to do. Gerald appeared at the edge of the room, not at the table, at a distance, watching. Daniel had been tracking him peripherally since they sat down. Gerald had a phone in his hand and the expression of a man whose search results had just returned something unexpected. He was looking at Daniel with the specific, controlled attention of someone who has received new information and is deciding what to do with it. Daniel looked at him, easy, unperturbed, the practiced non-reaction of a man who had been looked at that way 1,000 times and had learned to give it nothing to land on. Gerald looked away first. Victoria said, "He's going to come over here." "I know," Daniel said. "He runs operations. He protects the foundation from things that could damage it." "Sounds like a useful man." "He's extremely useful." She paused. "And right now he's worried about something." "What would worry him?" Daniel asked, asking the question cleanly, evenly, with the neutral curiosity of a man who already knows the answer and is waiting to see what she knows. Victoria looked at him. The specific quality of that look, assessing sharp, going one layer beneath the surface, told him she was closer than she realized. "Usually," she said, "people who are in this room who he doesn't have a file on." Emily was eating her pasta with total focus. She was not listening. She was always listening. "And does he have a file on me?" Daniel asked. "He does now," Victoria said. The silence between them had new weight in it. Not hostile, not afraid. Just the weight of two people who have been having one conversation and have just recognized the presence of another one underneath it. "Does that change anything?" Daniel said. Victoria looked at him for a long moment, at the borrowed shirt, the tired eyes, the steady hands, at the way he'd crouched in front of his daughter and held her gaze and made her believe she was safe without raising his voice or claiming authority from anyone in the room. At the way he sat now at ease, completely at ease in a ballroom full of power he wasn't performing for and wasn't threatened by. She thought about the drawing, about the house, about the sun in the corner. "Not yet," she said. Gerald materialized at the table with the expression of a man who has tried being patient and has concluded that patience has reached its operational limit. "Victoria," he said, "a word." "Later, Gerald." "Now would be better." Later, she said, was the specific quality of a woman who has made the same decision twice and intends to be asked a third time by no one. Richard has the room. The Hargrove situation is managed. I'm having dinner. Gerald looked at Daniel. The look was different this time. Not the blank assessment of an hour ago, but something more specific. More contained the look of a man who has opened a door and found something behind it that rearranged his entire understanding of the hallway. Mr. Carter, he said. His voice was level, professional. Gerald, Daniel said, same energy, exact same energy. The recognition in Gerald's eyes the moment he understood that Daniel knew exactly what Gerald had found and was not worried about it lasted approximately 2 seconds before Gerald's professionalism closed back over it. He looked at Victoria. When you have a moment, he said and left. Emily finished her pasta, set her fork down neatly, looked at her father. He knows something, she said. Maybe, Daniel said. What does he know? Grown-up stuff. She looked at him with the expression she reserved for answers she considered insufficient. That's not an answer. It's the answer I have right now. She studied him for a moment, reading him the way she'd been reading him her whole life, the way only people who have watched someone very closely for years could read, and something shifted in her expression. Not alarm, something more complicated. The look of a child on the edge of a question she's not ready to finish asking. Daddy, she said. Yeah. Are we okay? He looked at his daughter, at her mother's eyes and her father's face, the combination that had been breaking his heart in the best possible way since the day she was born. We are always okay, he said. I promise. She held his gaze for one more second. Then she nodded once with the compact decisiveness that meant she had chosen to believe him and was done with the question. Victoria watched this exchange in silence. When she looked back at Daniel, something in her expression had shifted, moved past the assessing into something more personal, something that was not detachment and not sympathy, but the specific recognition of a person seeing something real and refusing to look away from it. She trusts you completely, Victoria said. Yes. That kind of trust has to be earned. It does, he said. Every single day. What does it take? He looked at his daughter, who had moved on to surveying the dessert menu with strategic focus. Showing up, he said, every time, without exception, not because it's easy, because she's watching. He paused. You can say anything you want to a kid, but what they see is what they become. Victoria was quiet. Something was moving behind her eyes that she hadn't decided to share yet. He waited. He was a patient man when patience was called for. I owe you an honest thing, she said finally. You don't owe me anything. I know. I want to. She looked at the drawing. When Gerald ran your name, and he did, he ran it the moment we sat down. I'm going to assume he found something. I don't know what. I haven't asked him yet. She looked up at Daniel. But I want you to know that whatever he found, it does not change what happened tonight, what you and Emily came here to do. She paused. The drawing is real. Your daughter is real. This conversation is real. Whatever else is true, that's also true. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. He had not expected this. He had prepared for the version where the evening ended with Gerald's information arriving like a wall between them. Smooth final, the professional management of a liability. He had prepared for the graceful exit. The dignified close the drive home with Emily asleep in the back seat and the knowledge that he'd given her this one real thing. He had not prepared for Victoria Laurent to look across the table and offer him the benefit of the doubt she hadn't even fully been asked for. He said, You don't know what he found. No, she said. It might change things. Or it might not, she said. That's a conversation for later. Right now I'm having dinner with a man who drove here in a borrowed shirt to let a child say thank you, and I'm not done yet. Emily looked up from the dessert menu. The chocolate fondant, she announced. That's what we want. Victoria looked at her. He'll eat mine if I only order one, Emily said with the weary pragmatism of someone who had been through this before. Victoria signaled for Richard. 2 fondants, she said. And she looked at the table at the drawing at these 2 people from a world so different from hers that the distance should have been unbridgeable. And I'll take the same. Emily approved of this with a single satisfied nod. And somewhere across the room, Gerald Whitmore stood with his phone and the name Daniel Carter on the screen, an information that was about to change the entire geometry of this evening And he was deciding with the careful deliberateness of a man who understood that some decisions could not be undone, exactly what to do with it. Gerald Whitmore had been in this business long enough to know the difference between a problem and a crisis. A problem was manageable. A problem had edges. A problem was what you dealt with at 9 in the morning with coffee and a clear head and the right people in the room. A crisis was what arrived without warning and had no edges and required you to be three things at once: calm, fast, and right, in exactly that order. What he was looking at on his phone right now was not a problem. He was standing near the east wall of the ballroom, holding a device that had just returned a background search on Daniel Carter. A search he'd run routinely, the way he ran routinely on anyone who ended up in an unscheduled conversation with Victoria, and the results had produced in sequence the following: a sparse public record, a residential address in a mid-income district of the city, a work history that was clean and unremarkable, and then behind all of it, underneath the surface of the ordinary life, like bedrock beneath soil, the kind of results that came back only when a name was flagged at the federal level. Gerald read the flag twice. He was a methodical man. He reread things when the thing he'd read didn't make sense. It still said the same thing the second time. He put the phone in his pocket. He looked across the room at the table where Victoria Laurent was sharing chocolate fondant with a 7-year-old girl in a lavender dress and a man who had, according to every verified source Gerald could access, been under a federal task force watch for the last 4 years. Gerald breathed. Daniel Carter, according to Gerald's search results, was not a single father in a borrowed shirt who had driven here to let his daughter say thank you. Daniel Carter was the functioning head of the Carter Organization, a criminal enterprise that had operated along the eastern seaboard for over 2 decades, that had survived 3 federal investigations and 2 RICO attempts, that controlled shipping logistics, import distribution, and half a dozen seemingly legitimate businesses through which significant quantities of money moved in directions that the government had been trying to document since before Emily Carter was born. He was also, by every available indicator, one of the most careful men in that world, a man who had never been charged, never been arrested, never been photographed in connection with anything that could be used, a man whose public life was so clean and so ordinary that it functioned as the best possible disguise. Gerald stood with this information and tried to reconcile it with what he had watched happen at that table for the last hour. With the way the man had crouched in front of his daughter and held her gaze. With the way he ate the fondant that the kid slid toward him. With the drawing on the table, the yellow house, the crayon sun, the child's handwriting, spelling out a gratitude that had made Victoria Laurent change her remarks in real time. He could not reconcile it. He also could not ignore it. He found Diane Marsh near the bar, which was where he'd been hoping not to find her, and the expression on her face told him she'd been working something for the last 40 minutes. "Gerald," she said, warm, professional, the voice of a woman who had been trying to get something from the Laurent Foundation for 2 years and had learned to play a long game. "Diane," he said, "interesting evening." They usually are. Victoria's remarks were, she paused, choosing the word with the care of a writer who understood that the word you chose was half the story. Unexpected, very personal, very different from the previewed version. Victoria makes adjustments. She mentioned a family. Diane looked across the room at the table. A child, a drawing, a man who showed up to say thank you. She looked back at Gerald. "I spoke to him briefly. He declined to comment." "As is his right." "Absolutely." She smiled. "You know I'm going to find out who he is either way." Gerald looked at her. He was deciding something. He had been deciding it since he read the flag on his phone, turning it over with the methodical care he applied to every significant choice, weighing it, the way a person weighs something when they understand that either option has consequences. He said, "Whatever you find, Diane, whatever you think you're going to write, I'm asking you professionally to come to me before you publish anything." She looked at him. Something shifted behind her eyes, not the social calculation of a journalist managing a source, but genuine attention. "That's an unusual ask. It's an unusual situation." She looked at him for a moment. "Is there a story here that's bigger than the one I'm already seeing?" Gerald said. "I genuinely don't know yet." He paused. "But there are people in that story who deserve to not be caught in the middle of it." She understood what he was saying. Not completely, she didn't have his information, but enough. She was a good journalist, which meant she was also a person who occasionally remembered that journalism happened to actual humans. Come to you first, she said. Please come I am. She nodded, moved away. Gerald looked at his phone one more time. Then he looked at Victoria, who had just finished saying something to Emily that had made the child cover her mouth to contain the laugh. Then he looked at Daniel Carter, who was watching his daughter with an expression so unguarded and so complete that it was genuinely difficult to believe it was the same face that appeared in the Federal Task Force documentation. He walked to the table. Victoria saw him coming. Her expression said, I know, and not yet, and please, in about half a second. He ignored all three. He stopped at the edge of the table and said, Victoria, now. She looked at Emily, at Daniel. Something moved through her face. Excuse me for a moment, she said. She stood. She followed Gerald 6 feet to the side into the small privacy of distance while the room moved around them. Gerald kept his voice low. I need you to understand something before I tell you what I found. And I need you to not react in a way that, Gerald. Her voice was even. Just say it. Daniel Carter, Gerald said, is the head of the Carter Organization. Silence. He's been under federal surveillance since 2019. He runs the largest independent criminal logistics operation on the Eastern Seaboard. He has never been charged. He is considered by 3 separate federal agencies to be... Stop. Victoria's voice was very quiet. Stop for a second. Gerald stopped. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the table. At Emily, who had pushed her fondant toward Daniel and was explaining something to him with the focused energy of a child making an important point. At Daniel, who was listening to his daughter with the patient, complete attention of a man to whom she was the only thing in the room that mattered. You're certain, Victoria said. The flag was immediate, multiple federal databases. His civilian profile is, it's a construction, Victoria, a very good one. But underneath it, he came here, she said, with his daughter, to say thank you. Her voice was not shaking. It was the opposite of shaking, very still, the way things went still when a significant force was applied to them. He came here because his daughter made a drawing and decided gratitude should be delivered in person. Victoria. And he sat at this table and told me about his wife and the debt and the applications and the kitchen floor, and his daughter held my hand and she stopped. I know, Gerald said. Is Emily? She stopped again, started differently. Is she safe? Does she know? Gerald looked across at the table. At the child in the lavender dress who was currently demonstrating something with her fork for her father's edification. By every indication, he said carefully, she doesn't know anything. His operation is completely separate from that life. As far as anyone can document, she has no exposure to any of it. He paused. He has apparently gone to significant lengths to ensure that. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. The grant was real, she said finally. The housing situation was real. As far as I can verify, yes, the application came through legitimate channels. The address is a real residential property in his name. The debt from his wife's treatment is documented. Gerald paused. Whatever else he is, the part he told you about tonight is real. The floor, Victoria said quietly. It was real. Victoria, Gerald's voice was careful, the voice of a man who has known someone for 11 years and is about to say something they're not going to want to hear. You know what this means? If this gets out, if Diane Marsh connects the dots, the story isn't the foundation doing good work. The story is Victoria Laurent having dinner with someone under federal surveillance. That's the story. That's what it becomes. She turned and looked at him. Her face was composed, completely composed, but her eyes were doing something that had nothing to do with the Foundation's press exposure. And Emily, she said, I'm sorry. If that story gets out, Victoria said, what does it do to Emily? Gerald hadn't expected that question. It stopped him for one full second, the genuine halt of a man who had been running a risk calculation and had just had a variable introduced that changed the entire equation. She's 7, Victoria said. She made a drawing. She came here and said thank you and asked me if I was happy and put her hand over mine when I told her about my father. She looked at Gerald with the full-level authority of a woman who has made a decision and is delivering it. Whatever else is true about her father, she is a child, and I am not going to be the person whose evening becomes the story that follows her. Gerald looked at his employer. He had followed Victoria Laurent through 11 years of decisions, some brilliant, some costly, all made with the particular combination of intelligence and will that he had never quite seen in anyone else. He had disagreed with her before. He had been right before. He had also been wrong. He looked at Daniel Carter, watching his daughter in a borrowed shirt in a room full of people who didn't know what he was. "What do you want to do?" Gerald asked. "Go back to the table," Victoria said, "and then I'm going to give my remarks. And then you and I are going to talk later privately about what comes next." She held his gaze. "But right now, I am going back to that table. Because whatever Daniel Carter is, Emily Carter is a child who came here to say thank you, and she deserves the rest of her evening." Gerald looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something he did rarely, and only when he meant it completely, he stepped aside. She walked back to the table. Daniel looked up when she sat down. He read her face the way he read everything quickly, completely, without showing that he was reading it. She watched him do it. She watched him understand what she'd been told and absorb it and make the decision in approximately 3 seconds, not to address it here, not now, not in front of Emily. They looked at each other across the table. No words. But the conversation was entirely legible. "I know, that was Victoria. I know you know. That was Daniel. Not here. Victoria, no, not here. Daniel." With the particular exhausted, grateful weight of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just been offered unexpectedly one more hour before he has to put it down. Emily looked between them. "What happened?" "Nothing, Bug," Daniel said. She looked at him with the eyes that never accepted nothing. Then she looked at Victoria. "Did Gerald say something bad?" "Gerald said something complicated," Victoria said. Emily considered this. Is complicated the same as bad? "Not always," Victoria said. "Sometimes complicated is just true. And true things are rarely bad even when they're hard." Emily absorbed this with the serious attention she gave things she intended to return to later. Then she looked at her fondant, then at Daniel's. "You ate most of mine," she said. "I ate exactly 1 bite. 2 bites. 1.5. "That rounds to 2, Emily said. Victoria signaled for the waiter. "Another fondant," she said. Emily looked at her with an expression of pure, uncomplicated approval. "You're good at this," she said. And despite everything, despite Gerald and the federal flag and the weight of what was sitting at this table unaddressed, Victoria Laurent smiled, the real kind from underneath everything from the place that had been opening and closing all evening and had finally decided to stay open. "Good at what?" she said. "Being here," Emily said. "Most powerful people aren't. They're somewhere else in their heads. You're actually here." Victoria looked at her. Daniel looked at his daughter. Emily accepted her new fondant from the waiter with the gravity of an ambassador receiving credentials and began to eat, and the table breathed. But across the room, Gerald was on his phone again. And the expression on his face was the expression of a man receiving information from a second source that confirmed the first, and the second source had added something the first hadn't included. Something recent, something from tonight. And Daniel Carter felt it, the shift, the particular atmospheric change that preceded the arrival of something unavoidable. The way he always felt it, the instinct that had kept him alive in a world where missing signals was a terminal mistake. He felt it, and he looked at Emily eating her chocolate fondant with her eyes half closed in pleasure, and he thought, give me just a little more time. But time, as it turned out, had already made other plans. The podium was Victoria's territory, and everyone in the room knew it. She walked toward it with the particular quality of a person returning to ground they had always occupied, and the room oriented toward her the way it always did, the automatic collective adjustment of 400 people who understood without being told that something worth paying attention to was about to happen. Daniel watched her from the table. Emily had finished her second fondant and was now sitting with the composed, warm stillness of a child who has had a full evening and is beginning the long content descent towards sleep but is not ready to admit it yet. Her head was slightly heavier than usual. Her eyes were still completely open. "She's scared," Emily said. "Of the crowd?" "Of saying the true thing," Emily said. "The true thing is scarier than any crowd." Daniel looked at his daughter. "When did you figure that out?" "I've always known it," she said simply. "You showed me." He didn't ask when. He knew when. He knew the specific morning 2 years ago when he'd sat at the kitchen table and told Emily that her mother wasn't coming home, and he'd said it plainly without the softening language that adults use to protect children and usually only confuse them. And Emily had cried and he'd held her, and then she'd looked up and said, "That was the true thing, wasn't it, Daddy?" And he'd said yes. And she'd said, "It's better than the not true thing, even though it hurts more." And he'd said, "Yeah, Bug, it is." She'd been 5 years old. At the podium, Victoria looked out at the room, and then she looked across it briefly to their table, and Daniel gave her a small nod, the specific minimal nod of one person communicating to another across a room full of people. "You're okay. Go." She looked back at the crowd. "I had remarks prepared for tonight," she said. "I'm not going to give them." The room shifted. From the corner of Daniel's vision, Gerald went very still. "Instead," Victoria said, "I want to tell you about a piece of paper." Emily's hand found Daniel's under the table. He held it without looking down. "It was drawn in crayon," Victoria said, "by a child who is 7 years old and is the most honest person I've encountered in recent memory." A pause. "She came here tonight with her father, who drove here in a car that's older than my kitchen renovation, in a shirt that belongs to someone else, to say thank you for something I did that I don't even remember doing." Another pause. "And that fact that I don't remember but is the thing I want to talk to you about tonight." The room was completely still. Daniel felt Emily's hand tighten in his. Victoria talked about the floor, about what their decisions meant in kitchens and living rooms and in the lives of people they would never meet, about the difference between doing good at a distance and doing good with presence, about the 712 families in a single year who had been a line item on a spreadsheet she'd reviewed from behind a conference table and couldn't move past. She didn't name them. She didn't describe the glass breaking or the lavender dress or the yellow construction paper. She kept it private in the ways that mattered and let it be true in the ways that counted. And by the time she finished, the room was not applauding out of obligation. They were applauding the way people applaud when something lands in the chest rather than the ears. Emily watched the applause with her serious, unsmiling face, the face she wore for things she considered important enough to honor with full attention. Then she turned to Daniel and said very quietly, "She didn't say our names." "No. She protected us." He looked at his daughter. "Yes, she did." Emily thought about this. "She's good," she said. The word was simple and direct and meant something specific, not good, the way polite people were good or generous people were good, but good the way people were good when they had decided to be, when they had chosen it deliberately, in a moment when other choices were available. "Yeah," Daniel said, "I think she is." Victoria stepped down from the podium, and Gerald was at her side in 10 seconds, speaking quietly and urgently, and Daniel watched her receive whatever he was saying with the composed level expression of a woman who had already decided what she was going to do and was no longer being redirected. She came back to the table. She sat down. She looked at Daniel with the direct, complete attention she had been giving him all evening, and now there was something else in it. Not the intellectual interest of an encounter with someone unexpected, something more complicated. The look of a woman who is holding two entirely different versions of a person in her mind at the same time and has not yet decided which one is the true version and suspects the answer might be that they both are. "I need to ask you something," she said. "You can ask," he said. "I'll tell you if I can answer." She looked at Emily. Emily's eyes were 3/4 closed. The long evening was winning. "Emily Baum," Victoria said gently, "are you tired?" "No," Emily said without opening her eyes. Daniel looked at his daughter. "Bug." He looked at Victoria. Something moved between them, a shared, mutual, entirely wordless agreement that this conversation needed to happen, and that it needed to happen without Emily present, and that the logistics of that were going to require something. "Richard," Victoria said without raising her voice. Richard materialized. He had the gift Daniel had noticed of being exactly where he was needed without appearing to have moved there. "The private sitting room on the second floor," Victoria said. "Is it available?" "Yes." "Can you arrange something quiet up there for about 20 minutes? Something comfortable." Richard looked at Emily, who had tipped sideways in her chair approximately 1 inch and was fighting it with the whole body dignity of a child who has decided she is not tired. "Of course," he said. He looked at Daniel. Sir, if I may, there's a very comfortable room upstairs, much quieter. I could have someone stay with her. Someone from the foundation office, Anna. She has 3 children of her own. She's completely trustworthy. Daniel looked at Emily, looked at Richard, ran the quick, thorough assessment that he ran on every person who came into proximity with his daughter, the calculation that had no room for error. He looked at Victoria. Anna's worked with me for 7 years, Victoria said. Emily would be safe, I promise. He looked at his daughter. She had lost the fight against gravity and was fully leaning on the back of the chair, tossed so her eyes closed, her breathing slowed. He would give a great deal to be able to take her home right now. He would give a great deal to not have this conversation. He was going to have it anyway. 10 minutes, he told Emily softly. He touched her cheek. I'll be right upstairs. You can sleep. I'll be back before you know it. I'm not tired, she murmured. I know, Bug. Just rest your eyes. She was asleep before Richard finished the arrangements. Anna from the foundation office was everything Richard had implied: warm, competent, the specific energy of a person who had been around sleeping children enough times that she handled them like weather naturally and without drama. She carried Emily upstairs with the practiced ease of experience. Emily didn't wake. Daniel watched until they were out of sight. He sat back down. Victoria looked at him across the empty table. The drawing between them, the chandeliers overhead. The party around them distilled now to background noise, the rest of the evening continuing in its natural course, while the two of them sat in the particular pressurized quiet of a conversation that could not be managed or navigated, only had. You know that I know, she said. Yes. Gerald ran your name. I expected he would. And you came anyway. He looked at her. Emily came, he said. I was the driver. Something moved in Victoria's expression, not amusement, not quite, but adjacent to it. The recognition of something that was both true and deliberately incomplete. You could have said no to her, she said. But to her, not about this. He paused. She made the drawing 3 weeks ago. She's been carrying it in her purse since then, every single day. He looked at the yellow paper between them. When she believes in something, she carries it with her until she can deliver it. That's just who she is. Like her father, Victoria said. He looked at her. You believe in her, Victoria said. You carry that with you every single day. I watched you do it all evening, she paused. Whatever else is true about you, that is also true, and it is not a small thing. The room hummed around them. What do you want to know, he said. Everything, she said. But I'll start with this Emily doesn't know. No, Paul. You've built a life for her. I've built 2 lives, he said. And the honesty of it arrived without preparation, without the careful edit he applied to himself in every other room, in every other conversation. It arrived the way things arrived when you'd been holding them too long and the container finally gave. One that she lives in, one that pays for it. They have never touched. They will never touch. That is the only thing I have ever been completely certain of. Victoria looked at him. The grant, she said. The foundation, the application was real, he said. Every word I told you tonight was real. The debt was real. The eviction notice was real. The floor. He stopped, looked at the table. The floor was real. There are parts of that world where the money doesn't move fast enough to reach the regular life, where things fall apart because you built the wall too high between the 2 sides of yourself and nothing can get through. He looked up. I sat on that kitchen floor and I thought about what I was doing, what I was building, what Emily was going to grow up knowing about who her father was. He paused. The grant didn't just save the house. It saved me from a decision I was close to making that I wouldn't have come back from. Victoria was very still. What decision? She said. He looked at her directly. The kind that meant Emily would have had a father who was present and powerful, and everything she needed materially, and who would have been in every way that actually mattered gone. The silence was long. You were going to go further in, Victoria said. I was going to go all the way in, he said, because all the way in was the only way to make the money move fast enough to fix the problem. He paused. Your grant fixed the problem. Without that. And he stopped. I've been trying to go in the other direction ever since. Victoria looked at him. Are you out? Not yet, he said, honest. Completely honest, the honesty of a man who has decided that this conversation, of all the conversations he has had in his life, deserves the real answer. I'm close, closer than I've ever been. There are things that don't untangle overnight, but I'm going in that direction every day for her. And if you don't make it, he looked at the table, at the yellow drawing, at the crayon house. Then she has a trust that's already set up, he said quietly, and people who know to keep her away from anything that has my name on it. And a story, a true one, the parts that are true about a father who loved her, he paused. In a drawing she made when she was 7, that she'll know she delivered herself. Victoria looked at the drawing for a long time. When she looked up, her eyes were bright and her jaw was level, and her voice was the even, steady voice of a woman who had made a decision and was delivering it. I'm not going to do anything with what Gerald found, she said. No report to anyone, no documentation. The Foundation's interaction with your family is a housing assistance grant that was legitimately applied for and legitimately granted. That is the full extent of the official record, and it will remain the full extent. She paused. What happens in this room tonight is not official. He looked at her. I'm also not naive, she said. I know what you are. I know what that world produces. I know the people who get hurt in it, who aren't you and aren't Emily. Her voice was steady, but it had weight in it now. Real weight, the weight of a woman who had decided to be honest because the alternative was to be something less than herself. I'm not endorsing it. I'm not pretending it doesn't exist. I'm not asking you to, he said. I know. She looked at him. But I am also not willing to be the person who looks at a man who is genuinely trying to walk his way out of something terrible and burns the bridge he's walking on because the situation makes me uncomfortable. She paused. Emily deserves the version of her father who gets all the way out. And if there is anything I can do, not illegally, not in any way that compromises what the Foundation is, but anything to make it more likely that that version of you arrives, then I'd like to do that. Daniel looked at Victoria Laurent for a long moment. He had walked into this room tonight in a borrowed shirt to let his daughter say thank you. He had not walked in expecting to be seen. He had not prepared for the specific, complete, unflinching quality of being looked at by someone who had all the information and was choosing deliberately without naivety to see the whole person. Why, he said. She looked at the drawing. Because Emily drew a sun in the corner, she said, every time. Even when the rest of the picture was just a house and a man, she put the sun in the corner. She looked up. Kids who put the sun in the corner are kids who still believe the world is fundamentally okay. I want her to keep believing that. A pause. I think you do too. He looked at his daughter's drawing. He thought about the kitchen floor, about the letter, about the direction he'd been walking in ever since, one careful step at a time toward a version of himself that Emily could know all of. He said, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Victoria said. Thank me when you're out. And across the room, Gerald Whitmore closed his phone, put it in his pocket, and stood with his arms at his sides, in his jaw level, and looked at the table where his employer was sitting with a man whose name was flagged in 3 federal databases, and did something he did rarely, and only when he had thought a thing through completely. He walked away. He went back to managing the room, to protecting the Foundation, the guests, the evening, to being exactly what he was, the most loyal person Victoria Laurent knew. He walked away and left them to it. The sitting room on the 2nd floor was quiet in a different way than the ballroom. Not the calibrated quiet of money, just the natural quiet of a room where nothing was performing. Emily was asleep on a small sofa with a blanket that Anna had produced with maternal efficiency, her lavender dress smoothed carefully, her small purse set on the cushion beside her like she'd placed it there herself. Daniel stood in the doorway for a moment before he went back downstairs. He looked at his daughter, the full length of her, the specific architecture of a sleeping child, the way her face went completely itself when consciousness withdrew, without the animated performance of wakefulness, just the actual face underneath. Emily's face when she slept looked like the answer to a question he'd been asking since the day she was born. It looked like the reason he had never stopped, not once, not even in the worst of it, trying to find his way toward a life she could know all of. He went back downstairs. Victoria was standing when he returned, not at the table she'd moved the way people moved when they were thinking through something that needed space. She turned when she heard him. She's sleeping, he said. She's fine? Good. Victoria looked up at him. We have approximately 10 minutes before the event formally closes, and I lose the ability to avoid Gerald's debrief. Then let's use them. She looked at him for a moment. I want to ask you something that has nothing to do with tonight. Or it has everything to do with tonight, but not with any of the complicated parts. Ask. When did you decide, she said, to try to get out? What was the moment? He sat down, not at the table, at one of the chairs near it, the slightly less formal arrangement of two people talking without the architecture of a dinner between them. Victoria sat across from him. He thought about the answer, the real one. There wasn't one moment, he said. There were about 40 of them over 3 years, small ones mostly, Emily saying something or doing something that made me realize what I was building her on top of. He paused. But if I had to pick one, he stopped. It's okay, Victoria said. You don't have to. No, I want to. He looked at the table, at the drawing that he'd carried up from the ballroom without thinking about it, which was now between them. Again, the yellow house with its son. She was 5, about 4 months after her mother died. I came home later than I should have from the other side of things. She was supposed to be asleep. She was in the kitchen. He paused. She'd made dinner, he said, by herself. Not real dinner. She was 5. She'd made crackers with peanut butter and put them on a plate in a circle. And she'd put a glass of orange juice next to it. And she was sitting at the table waiting. He stopped. She said I made dinner so you wouldn't be hungry when you got home. That was it. That was the whole thing. He looked at Victoria. She was 5 years old and she was taking care of me. And I thought, what am I building? But what is she learning? What is she going to carry out of this house and into her life because I modeled it? Victoria was quiet. She should be learning that people are taken care of, he said. Not that she needs to do the taking care. Not at 5. Not ever. Not because I'm somewhere I can't come home from at a decent hour. He looked at his hands. I came home the next 3 weeks at the same time every night. I made dinner. She sat at the table and talked to me while I cooked. And I thought this is what I'm building. Everything else is just the scaffolding, and the scaffolding comes down. The room was very quiet. She made you crackers, Victoria said. Peanut butter and crackers, he said, in a circle, on a plate. Victoria looked at the drawing. And tonight she made a drawing. She makes things, he said, when she feels something. She makes something that represents it, and she carries it until she can deliver it. He paused. Her mother was the same way. What did her mother make? He smiled. It was the particular private smile of a man visiting a memory that was painful and precious in exactly equal measure. Playlists, he said. She made playlists for everything. Good days, bad days, transitions, endings. When Emily was born, she made a playlist for the drive home from the hospital. Labeled it First Day. He stopped. I still have it. I don't listen to it very often, but I have it. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Tell me her name, she said. Sarah. Sarah, Victoria repeated. Simple, direct, the act of a person who believed names mattered and said them accordingly. Yeah, he said. The quiet that settled over them was not empty. It was the kind of quiet that existed at the end of a long conversation, where everything essential had been said, and what remained was just the two people sitting with it. Gerald appeared in the doorway. He looked at Victoria. He looked at Daniel. His expression had moved through several configurations over the course of the evening and had arrived at something that was not warmth exactly, but was in the same building as it, the particular expression of a man who has encountered something he didn't expect and has done the intellectual work of absorbing it properly. The last guests are leaving, he said. The Hargrove table is asking to say goodbye to you. Victoria looked at Daniel. He stood. We should go, he said. You don't have to rush. No. He shook his head. We've already taken more of your evening than... You haven't taken anything, she said. You gave. She said it plainly without performance. You and Emily both gave something tonight that I didn't know I was missing. That's not taking. He looked at her. Yeah, I mean that, she said. I know you do, he said. He went upstairs to get Emily. Anna was reading on her phone in the chair across from the sofa, and she looked up when Daniel came in and nodded once. She's fine. She's been peaceful with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this exact thing many times and understood that the most important information a parent needed was delivered in the first second. He crouched next to the sofa. He put his hand on Emily's shoulder. "Hey," he said softly, "time to go." She came up slowly from sleep with the specific disorientation of a child waking in an unfamiliar place, the quick moment of adjustment, the rapid inventory of her surroundings, and then the landing on his face and the immediate complete relaxation that followed. "Hi," she said. "Hi, Bug. Time to go." She sat up, looked for her purse, found it on the cushion, picked it up. She stood swayed, slightly found her feet. She looked at Anna. "Thank you," she said, slightly rough with sleep, completely sincere. "You're very welcome," Anna said. "It was nice to meet you." Emily nodded, took Daniel's hand. They went downstairs. Victoria was near the entrance, having said her goodbyes to the last of the formal guests, and Gerald was at her side with the clipboard energy of a man running an after-action inventory. She turned when she heard them on the stairs. Her eyes went to Emily first, and something in them softened, in the way things softened when you looked at a sleeping child who had just woken the warmth of encountering someone who was completely undefended. Emily walked across the lobby with the slightly rolling gait of a child who was three-quarters awake, and she stopped in front of Victoria, and she looked up at her with her mother's eyes clear and direct and completely present. "I'm glad we came," Emily said. "So am I," Victoria said. "Did you mean what you said in your speech about changing things?" Victoria crouched down so they were eye level. It was a deliberate gesture, the specific intentional act of a woman who had decided somewhere over the course of this evening that conversations with this child deserved to happen at equal altitude. "Yes," she said, "I meant it." "Will you actually do it?" "Yes." "How will I know?" "Because Victoria said I'm going to tell you." She reached into her clutch and took out a card. A real card, not an assistance card, not a foundation card, a small cream-colored card with a single phone number and her name. She held it out to Emily. "This is my direct number. Not my office. Not Richard. Mine. If 6 months from now you want to know what happened, you call me." Emily looked at the card. She took it with both hands, the same way she'd held the invitation 3 weeks ago, the same way she held things she had decided were significant. She put it in her purse carefully in the small inside pocket. "I'll call," she said. "I know you will," Victoria said. She looked at her for one more moment, the full, unguarded, completely honest look of a woman who had spent an evening being cracked open by the questions and gestures and plain truth of a 7-year-old and was not going to pretend otherwise. "You are extraordinary," she said. "Do you know that—" "My dad says it," Emily said. "It's nicer when someone else says it." Victoria glanced up at Daniel. "Your father is right." "He usually is," Emily said, "even when I don't want him to be." Victoria stood. She looked at Daniel. The full moment of it, standing in the lobby of this hotel at the end of an evening, that neither of them had planned carrying everything the evening had been, and everything it had clarified in the particular unresolved, ongoing nature of both their lives. "I meant what I said upstairs," she said quietly. "I know. When you get there, I'll get there," he said, and the certainty in his voice was not performance. It was the voice of a man who had been walking in one direction for 3 years and intended to finish the walk regardless of how long it took. For her, "I'll get there." Victoria nodded. He put his hand out. She took it the same way she had the first time, firm, real, the handshake of two people who had met each other properly, and this time when she let go, she held it one beat longer. "Daniel," she said, "yeah. Put the sun in the corner," she said, "when you build the next thing. Whatever it is, put the sun in the corner." He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Emily, who was standing beside him with her purse over her shoulder and her lavender dress slightly wrinkled from sleep, and her mother's eyes watching him with the patient, complete love of a child who had decided somewhere very young that her father was the most important project she would ever work on. "Yeah," he said, "I will." They walked out through the lobby and into the night air, which was cool and clean, and Emily took his hand at the door, the way she always took his hand at doors, and the valet brought the Civic around, and the young man handed Daniel the keys, and this time didn't look away, just met his eyes directly and said, "Good night, sir." Daniel said, "Good night." They got in. Emily pulled her seatbelt on. She held her purse in her lap with both hands. She looked straight ahead for a moment. Then she reached into the inside pocket and took out Victoria's card. She held it up to the light from the street. She meant it, Emily said. The number. I think she did. I'm going to call in exactly 6 months. I believe you completely. She put the card back, settled in her seat. Daddy? Yeah. I think tonight was one of the most important nights of our lives. He pulled out of the lot and into the street. The city around them moved in the ordinary, ongoing, completely indifferent way of cities at night. He thought about Gerald and the federal flag and the conversation upstairs and the distance between where he was and where he was going and how much road was still between here and there. He thought about Sarah, about playlists, about crackers on a plate in a circle. He thought about the drawing, about the sun in the corner. He thought about what Emily had said. Everyone has a floor, and the people who remember theirs stay good, and he thought that he had been on his floor more than once, and he intended to stay the kind of man who remembered it, and that this was the one promise he had been making to himself in different words for 3 years, and intended to keep for the rest of his life. Yeah, he said, I think it was. Emily leaned her head against the window. She was asleep in 4 minutes the way she always went, quickly, completely with total trust, that the road was being handled and the destination was certain and the person at the wheel would not stop until she was home. He drove. The highway opened. The city fell back. The Civic moved through the night with the plain, reliable purpose of a thing that had no illusions about what it was and had somewhere to be anyway. Daniel Carter drove his daughter home. The man he had been was behind him. The man he was becoming was ahead. And in her small purse, against her side, a card with a direct phone number and a piece of yellow construction paper with a crayon house and a sun in the corner, were traveling together toward a morning that was going to be different from all the mornings before it. Not fixed, not finished, not complete, but pointed finally and without question in the only direction that had ever mattered: home.